Cold Spring Harbor Library. They're going to have a little young adult hike. So hopefully the weather will cooperate, and actually a few young adults will actually show up and do this little journey down through Oyster Bay Woods and so forth, one of the nice little green belts on Long Island, and celebrate God's goodness and have some camaraderie and friendship too. They won't get to the coffee house, but they'll be enjoying the cathedral of God's creation out there.
Yes, I was thinking about the coffee house and the hike today too. When I woke up, I was like, "Oh no, it's raining," but it's clearing up, so I'm excited.
You're gonna go?
I'm gonna try. I'm gonna try to make it. We'll see. We'll see. I gotta come support, right?
That's right. Well, I'm glad you feel that little tug.
Good.
I'm glad you feel that tug on your spirit to go.
Yeah, and I was excited to hear that there's an actual spring of water. And
they call it Cold Spring Harbor. I never thought you could still identify a spring, but apparently, according to Giovanna, you can. So they'll start there with maybe a refreshing glass of water from the spring, and they'll be ready for their hike.
That's cool. Thank you, Father. All right, so Robert, welcome again, and thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And so go ahead. You could start with
anything. I probably should start with a little back history. I want to thank Father Peter. I've learned so much from him in the daily Mass, and from going to Mass on the weekends as well with my family, and little things that he said, whether it be in the daily Mass or his homilies, have been instrumental. And I want to give God all the glory for everything that we do here today. And I know Father Peter has said little things that have been so inspirational to me that I just want to share those as well. God tailor makes his interventions for us, and I absolutely believe that, because before this story came about, I just have to share for a minute that I'm a traveling Army contractor. I go around all around the country, sometimes even overseas, Hawaii, Alaska, maybe the Middle East. And I didn't know this was going to happen per se, that I was going to be able to share this story. I think it was a Belong More Deeply sort of campaign I think the church was going through at the time, and Father Peter approached me in the foyer and said, "Bob, would you mind sharing some of your story? I heard you have an interesting story to share. Maybe you'd like to." And I said, "Sure, anything you want, Father." And went back and forth a little bit, me being on the road, not knowing if it was going to line up, sort of like we did with Barbara and the radio show here. And by God's grace, we're all here, so I'm thankful for that. So there I was, going back and forth with my wife, talking to Father about whether or not I could do it or not. I said, "Well, Jan, you're going to have to tell him that maybe I can't do it because I think I have to go somewhere else." And she said, "Okay," I told him. And then that fell through, and I was going to be home. And I said, "Jan, well, tell Father Peter I can do it again." And she said, "Okay." I talked to him. She got back to me, and he said, "You're going to do it at the 8? And I said, "The Mass? The Holy Mass?" He said, "Yes, Robert." I said, I just imagined I was going to be speaking to someone at the basement or in the parish office about
Only
maybe
3 or 4 at a time.
Yeah, 3 or 4 at a time. So I give God all the glory for this and the Holy Spirit, because I'm not even a writer, and this just sort of flowed out of me when I began it. My story of rediscovering the faith, I'd say, began about 8 years ago. But about 15 years ago is when the story really begins. I was preparing to get married, and it was a struggle for me. I wasn't ready to assume responsibility, nor did I want to be responsible for a family. And it's probably why I ended up living with my in-laws. I was Catholic in name only. I didn't celebrate the Mass or the sacraments, and was incapable and unwilling to grow up. I was stubborn, prideful, and self-centered. But she was a good girl. So we married by a justice of the peace. And I had a lot of resentment for my circumstances with my living situation, for not being perfect. I didn't want to be living down here in Long Island. I'm from Massachusetts, and I wasn't interested in raising a family here either. A lot of my frustration was directed towards my soon-to-be wife and my in-laws. I really felt like a fish out of water, and my wife wanted to stay here, save and build, and I saw the price tag on everything as another reason to leave. I didn't have the faith she did to overcome the financial hurdles that lay ahead. It was too much for me. I wasn't strong enough to believe we can make it. Well, shortly after we were married, that's exactly what I did. I left. I abandoned my wife and children, and I selfishly did all that in the name of my own personal freedom. I was a moral relativist. I believed my own baloney, and I knew best. I twisted and turned the truth in my mind to suit my decisions because it made me feel better about the choices I made. I felt like in those days that my freedom to lead my family as I chose was being treaded upon because I lived with my in-laws who only wanted to help me, but I couldn't see it, and I felt like a prisoner. I was angry because I wasn't able to live the way I wanted my family to live. I had disdain for Long Island, even though I didn't have the means to provide another living situation. But what I really wanted was to do what I wanted to do, without question. Me is what it really was. I was stuck in guy land, not ready for manhood, marriage, never mind fatherhood. My perception was, this is my life. So I moved back to Massachusetts, took an old job back at a paper mill, and began resenting my wife instantaneously. Immediately she wanted a divorce, and rightfully, she was well within her right. I was horrendous in my poor attempt to be a husband, and I began sliding further and further down a bottomless pit, to drugs, to divorce, to depression. I rented an apartment that I now call my 80,000 square foot black abyss. It wasn't hell, but you could see it from the front porch. I had it a few years as I ever so slowly began to realize that I totally destroyed and ruined my life and family. I blew it, and I felt like it was hopeless. With that in my heart, I spiraled down to near suicide, and I certainly wasn't free. I was in the dark. This isn't what I wanted, and I would often remember my family I had abandoned and severed myself from, and I was in rough shape to say the least. Then one day they closed the factory I worked at, so I reached out to a friend I grew up with and told him, I'm starving in the land of plenty up here. I can't make it. I won't be able to pay my kids' child support. He helped me get straight, he helped me get a job, and with gratitude I began to pray at the end of each day. And ever so slowly, my life started to change. I had hope. My friend described the job he could get me in Iraq as an army contractor, handing out weapons and body armor to soldiers during the surge. Said it could be dangerous, a lot of traveling, flying, and convoying. I'd be gone for at least a year. I figured, why not? Worst case, I don't come back. They'll talk good about me. And I had a purpose. So as I got ready to ship out, tying up loose ends and errands and seeing myself off, parting ways with that black abyss of an apartment, my brother, before I left, gave me some rosary beads. And he said, Rob, take these with you wherever you go. Promise me. And I did. So off I went overseas. It was good work and great money, and I figured I'd stay there for at least 5 years. But still something was missing. I felt alone, unloved, and forgotten in the Iraqi desert of the Middle East. Those years I was divorced, I used to dream at night and during the day of how in the world I could possibly get my wife and family back. I had no answers. It seemed all but impossible. There's no way. Too much has happened. And my friends were sick and tired of hearing about it. I would talk about my ex-wife constantly. They used to laugh at me, saying, come on, man, let it go. Get over it. Shut up, Rob. But I couldn't. I was fractured, to say the least, and the dreams continued. In fact, they increased, and I was tormented emotionally. While in Iraq, praying at night and carrying the rosary beads around, wherever I went, I decided to go to Mass, and the priest was amazing. I thought he was talking to me personally. So I kept going, and I kept dreaming of my wife and kids, and it got so difficult for me. All these thoughts and feelings I had swirling around within me. In my brokenness, I got on my knees and I prayed to God for help because I didn't know where else to turn to. And I cried out to him, Lord, please help me let go of this woman. If I'm not meant to be with her, then please help me let go of her, because I can't do it. and I attempted to move on. When my work was finished in Iraq, I came home for about 10 days to see my family. I drove up from Virginia, called ahead to coordinate my visit, and something strange happened. Doors began to open for me. I was welcomed to wait for my son in my in-laws' house. People were happy to see me. I was invited to stay as a guest on the couch so I could put my son on the bus for his first day of school. As our visit progressed and wound down, I settled in for a night on the couch when something wonderfully amazing happens to me. My wife kissed me. I couldn't believe it. I was in absolute shock. I thought for a moment, is this really happening to me? Am I dreaming again? In that moment, I knew God's mercy and love for me. And I knew that I had received a miracle that day. I knew I was getting a gift from God. And I told my wife I wanted to live a religious life with her, and we began to rebuild. My dad used to say, "You know, Rob, it's funny. When you give up on people, that's when they surprise you." Well, God sure surprised me. Since those days, I've come to learn that I'm not special. The truth is, we all are. I rise and fall every day. I'm thankful that God continues to teach me, and He's not done with me yet. The rosary beads I carried back then, now I don't leave home without. My Blessed Mother, Mary, snuck up on me and brought me back to Jesus through Mary. In looking back, I know God was with me through it all, carrying me, loving me, and forgiving me. And our Blessed Mother was praying for me. And I realized anything is possible with God. See, I tried for years to rely on myself and my own sheer willpower. I'm a Marine, and when I would fail, I would redouble my efforts and begin again even harder, as if I hadn't put in any effort or enough effort in the first time to achieve anything. It was only when I was completely exhausted enough to let go of control that God began to steer me home. And through His grace, I got remarried to my wife, this time in the church, St. Francis in Greenlawn. About 8 years ago, after we married in the church, God blessed us with another baby boy, Gabriel. I recatechized myself and received confirmation about 5 years ago from Father Peter on Pentecost. When I need help now because the world can make you weary, I come to the church. I go to the Eucharist, and especially confession and reconciliation, and surround myself with you, the body of Christ, my family. And our family center is the Holy Trinity, and I want you to know that I'm praying for you, so please pray for me. God bless.
So, Rob, tell us some of the backstory here.
Sure.
That's
Happy
awesome.
to do
That's
it.
awesome. Let's hear a few more little details, little precious
Yeah.
details.
Like, for example, what was going on with your in-laws and your wife that led to that glorious moment of that return?
Well, I think in hindsight, my father-in-law has shared with me that, he thought it was great that I was mailing things home, for my son from Iraq. They had pugs and pogs because they don't use change over there. It's just inconvenient. It's too heavy, to be exchanging money and coins over in the war zone. So they have a sort of pog system where it's just a disc of paper, really, and has a denomination on it. I mail those home, and different things I think a young boy might be interested in, and I'd sit down and read stories and put them on a DVD and mail those home. And he thought that was stand up, so he was very welcoming. He was very instrumental as well in bringing me home, because when I came for a visit, he'd say, "Oh, this is a friend of the family," and little things like that may go unnoticed normally, but it was very special to me, and I felt like he was definitely an anchor that helped replant the seed so my family could come back, or I could come back to the fold of my family.
What was going on with your wife? Was she receiving a lot of supernatural graces, huh? During that?
Absolutely. The rosary herself, and was working with other parishioners from St. Francis and rediscovering the glories of the rosary and all the grace that's encompassed in that. So it was actually very interesting how it all sort of segued together, you know, in the mystery of things. I really thought it was profound how that happened, because she was on her own journey as well, because I was. So she was actually, I think, praying with some friends. I hope I can mention their name, the Labassos.
Right.
And I think the world of them. I call a lot of the daily communicants of Mass, I call them the God Squad, because I just think they're, you know, I think a lot of us are still here from, you know, some of our grandparents and loved ones' prayers that were so faithful. But yeah, Father Peter, definitely amazing. I mean, you know, can't say enough. I was hoping I was going to go on the pilgrimage with you to Fatima.
Oh, that would have been great. Can't do it though. Huh?
I am going, so I'll be able to be sort of
Oh, you are going.
give you a little insight into it if you need any questions answered. I'm going in August with my son.
Oh, okay.
So that, I guess he has schooling and testing.
Right, that's right. So you're going to go with him. Well, it's going to be an awesome trip.
Yeah.
It's going to be an awesome trip. It's like, tell me all about it when you get home. Well,
Absolutely.
I've never been to Fatima myself. It's going to be exciting for me too.
I can't wait.
We'll tell everybody about that.
Well, we do have a parish-oriented trip at the end of October 25th, going, and it's through 206 Tours. That we already have probably 17 or 18 people that are pretty probably going to be on board. So it's going to be an awesome trip. It's not only Fatima itself, but there's a Eucharistic miracle in Portugal there that we're going to stop by to see. Then some of the special things in Spain is we take our bus trip across to Avila, the hometown of St. Teresa, some of the special Burgos and Salamanca. Those are beautiful places. The birthplace of St. Ignatius, and over the beautiful Pyrenees Mountains into Lourdes. And that's, of course, the hype. And I've been telling everybody, don't miss on taking the bath. Okay, some people skip the bath. You can't do it. You get to Lourdes, you gotta take it. It's easy and it's over with before you know it, but it's really the high point of the whole thing. So so think about it if you can. If the Lord's putting it on your heart, if you're being called this year, the Lord will take care of the details. Okay, even the finances, the Lord will figure out that one too. So thanks for a chance to say something. And it's great to have Rob here. Rob comes in and out, so often. I thought he worked for the CIA, or that he was a Navy SEAL or something like that, disappearing to go to these weird places. But we're glad to have him when we see him, because we know he's part of the Lord's team, and he's still a Marine in the Lord's service, right? So that's important.
Well, I know my husband David, Deacon Dave, always would tell me, "Oh my God, you got to meet this guy, Rob. You're not going to believe this story. You got to meet him."
He was amazing as well. I definitely want to give Dave a lot of credit, and along with Father Peter and everybody that I see as God putting in my path. He definitely helped that come to fruition as far as being confirmed. I used to meet with him. We'd talk, and it was great. We'd come to witness on occasion in the parish office. Maybe that's where I got the idea that I'd just be talking at the parish office. I used to go to Deacon Dave. We'd talk to people that were thinking about getting baptized. Just talk to them about it.
That's right. Beautiful. Deacon Dave, and of course I instructed Deacon Dave. Deacon Dave started out as a member of another Christian denomination, and I brought it into the church. But of course, it was he had to make up a little bit more even after he was even as on his way to the diaconate, because a lot of our so-called instruction sessions ended up with Dave, I need help with this. I need help with that. We got the youth group going. Can you set this up? And Dave wasn't getting all the instruction. He was getting practically broken into the work of it. So I guess the Lord worked it in His own way, to make it all happen at that time. So these are good memories all around.
And being a good Catholic, I was like astounded every time Dave came home. I would say to him, "So what did you learn? What happened?" He'd say, "Well," because Dave was very easy peasy kind of person. He's like, "Well, yeah, we had Father Peter's having a dance with the youth group, and we had to kind of get some more pizza.
Pizzas,
we had to get
set them out for pizza.
There were a few kids we had to drive home, and so did you have a lesson? Did you have an actual lesson? Yeah,
10 minutes.
Yeah, we're gonna catch up. We're gonna catch up." It's like, oh my God, please.
But Dave made it, and of course the Lord laid it on his heart about becoming a deacon, and of course then the coffee house is going to be named in his memory. So because actually Dave his last gainful employment was the coffee house, the Starfish Coffee House in Amityville, which will always be a treasure in our memories. So just let this little place be a memory of Deacon Dave also.
And it reminds me of this radio station because, as Rob knows, and Caterina, it's all about the starfish story, which is just so, I don't know, it's so touching. It's just like that one person, you know, the lady was throwing the starfish back in the water, and someone said, well, this is ridiculous. This is a futile attempt to save all these starfish. And she said, well, it mattered to the one I just threw back. And, you know, I think that's kind of what we're about. Like, let us know you're a starfish out there, and that we threw you back, and that
Yes.
you're, you know, right?
Great imagery. Even if it's just one person, we don't know who we're touching or who listens. Trevor was even telling me before that some listeners that he knows have been listening as well. So it's just you don't know who you're touching. You really don't. So it's just such a blessing. And if you feel inspired again to say anything or come on the show, we'd love to have you. And I was just thinking before about the military and just you know that it's so important to keep our Army men and women in prayer, and you know, your story was just so inspirational for me, and what you said about Deacon Dave too. That's just so funny how, you know, lessons in life are just kind of taught not how we want them to be, in a very loving and fun kind of way.
But can I ask Rob a few more questions?
Sure.
So, Rob, were you a Marine before all this happened? I lost.
Yes,
You were.
long before any of this happened.
Before you met Janet?
Oh yeah, right out of high school I went into the Marines.
Oh, okay. So
I didn't know much, but I knew I needed, you know, some firm correction, let's call it. I mean, I just needed structure. I knew that, so I knew I was going to get that in that outfit. So that's why I gravitated. And then, you know, not for nothing, I felt like a bit lost in things because I remember my peers were all choosing colleges and places to run off to, and I said, oh, you know, I didn't realize I needed a plan. I didn't have a plan. I needed a plan. So I ended up joining the Marines. And
How long did you stay in the Marines?
I did 4 years
4 years.
in the infantry, and then I got out, and it was a remarkable experience. I got to actually see the world, you know, as advertised, sort of. So
really?
I got to go to Europe and do a Mediterranean float, and you know, and then went out to the west coast of the United States. But the Med was wonderful. I still want to go back to Italy, and I saw all the major cities. I went to Greece, Israel, Turkey. So it was very enjoyable.
And you actually get to see it.
Yeah, I did. It was really, by God's grace, I give Him all the glory. It was peacetime. You know, I didn't have to do anything that these young men and women have to do now, and you know, that's a cross to bear. And I thank God for having spared me that burden, because that's a tough one for a young person to deal with.
So, you know, I love to talk to military people because I teach a lot about spiritual warfare.
Sure.
And especially as it's demonstrated in the scriptures, and I like to draw, you know, analogies. So, like sometimes we call people who are really very, you know, schooled in spiritual warfare. We actually call them generals, right?
Oh,
the generals of spiritual warfare, and you know, those people have mentored us in many ways, but. Can you tell us things that might be analogous with the spiritual warfare that the Lord calls us to, that you might have learned as a Marine, you know?
St. Paul says, I fought the good fight at the end, that the Christian journey is not without warfare, and that we're fighting not only against human powers, but against principalities and powers in high places. So it's you know, anything you could share that you learned about the spiritual life coming out of the Marines. Like, for example, I mean, St. Ignatius, who founded the Jesuits, you know, some of their early structure really is based on his military experience. Right. He had his conversion when he was wounded in a battle, and he had to have a long convalescence, and it was that time that, you know, he wanted you know, the current novels of the day, the current romance. No, they didn't have any for him. The poor nuns, all they had was spiritual reading. So he got into it. The Lord touched him somehow through the lives of the saints and so forth. But he never forgot his military background. And of course, the Jesuits are called the Company of Jesus. In other words, the military group of Jesus, you know. So
And
maybe you have a thought.
And also we have that great Ephesians 6, where Paul tells us to put on the armor,
Sure.
right? The
That's right.
breastplate, the sword, the helmet. But something jumped out at me when you were speaking about, you said that you had kind of like a feeling, an experience of doubling up. You know, like you learned it there. How
Right.
to...
The military way, I think, is a wonderful approach in its infancy stage, and I think I needed a plan, I needed structure. For instance, when I first began reading the Gospels, it was probably a military issue I got from the chaplain. I was bothering the chaplain all the time. I really was. I was learning all the time, and I didn't know, because unfortunately I didn't have the foundation of the faith down as a young man or a young boy even. So I was learning later on in life, and I was learning about the saints, I was learning about the gospel, and I would bother him about everything. I mean, he got so sick and tired of me bothering him on the ship one time. I said to him, "Father, is it okay to get a tattoo? I don't think that, isn't that desecration of the body?" You know, I was very regimented. And he said, "Well, you take aspirin, don't you?" So he was a very good
If you want to have one,
pastor. He was very good. He bore me with a lot of patience, so I'm thankful for that. And I remember he used to run around on top of the ship wearing a T-shirt that says "No guts, no glory." So I love the faith and all the genius of Catholicism. Really drawn to that. But in its infancy, you know, without having a spiritual guide, from that moment to my downfalls and you know, rising again from the ashes, I think what was most needed was, you know, a spiritual guide, you know, the priesthood, because I can remember just being in Iraq thinking, you know, before all this happened, that I wasn't worthy of God's grace and love, and that's really the underlying theme of that whole reconversion story, is that I never thought in my brokenness that I was worthy of being loved. I just didn't think I was, and I think that, you know, I don't think that's unique of me at all. I think that's very commonplace for a lot of people. But I remember reading in that gospel from that moment when I was a young man to being in the Iraqi desert, still being wrapped around that immature notion. And I remember thinking, I remember talking to a guy one day. I think we were just, because the bathrooms, you know, probably a quarter mile away, or sometimes where you got to use running water. And we were talking about the gospel a little bit, and I said, "Well, there's only 144,000 names in the Book of Life." And he said, "Yes, but there's also the many. It refers to all the other people, but it subtly does it, because God doesn't hammer things. He's patient with us." So I can't remember what it says exactly, Father, but
the text of Revelation, 144,000 sealed. But there are other visions that's symbolic of the tribes of Israel, you know, multiplied. In other words, the 12 tribes multiplied by.
But then the multitude, 12. Right?
But then beyond that, he also saw the multitude that no person could ever count.
Right, and that's what I had sort of glossed over and didn't even know. I just focused on 144,000. You know? And that
you
was,
want to be one of those guys.
I'm part of the multitude.
The Marines are the first crew in, so that's so you were in that crew. There's another great guy though that we got to just, I think, tip our hat to a little bit, and something's coming up over at Caterina's parish about Dr. Chufo, and maybe just because you know this radio got its start really with Dr. Chufo and Dr. Palmer. So please briefly, I guess, catch us up. What's happening over there?
You mean with the parish?
They're dedicating something.
No, they're going to have a dedication for him on Sunday, I believe.
Oh yes, there's going to be
on the 1st.
On the 1st of July, yes. In the basement of the Siena Center. So the Siena Center is an extension of the church. There's the I guess you could call it the cathedral or the old church, and then they made a new part to accommodate all the parishioners. So masses are held in the church and also in the Siena Center. And in the basement, they constructed a family room. It's called a Holy Family Room. And which was meant to be a cozy place to pray and to celebrate Mass. And there's carpet, and Miss Chufo, Dr. Chufo's wife, graciously donated in Dr. Chufo's honor beautiful stained glass windows. And there's going to be a Mass and a dedication ceremony.
Is it a chapel or a prayer room? I mean, do you sit on a kneeler, or do you sit on the floor, or what do you have?
Yeah, so it's like I would say it's kind of like a chapel. It's like this like a rectangular room. There's chairs all along the sides, and the altar is like in the middle. And then you can kneel if there's no kneelers yet, but you can kneel on the carpet. It's like soft kind of. So it's hard to, I guess it's like a multi-purpose kind of room. You could take the chairs out and maybe just kind of sit on the floor and have little discussions or that kind of thing. So it's kind of like a church, but a little bit more, I guess.
A gathering place.
A gathering kind of place, yeah. It could serve those two purposes.
That's great. That's great. So you could have a youth group in there, or an older group, and they could
Yeah,
on the
it's a
floor
little bit more
or on the
private.
chair. Right.
You could close the doors.
by themselves. And it'll be dedicated in memory of Tony Chufo.
Yes, and I just wanted to say, I was telling Rob before too, and Mr. Chufo definitely touched many people. I believe in his life. Just he was a very loving man, and just showed just genuine care for people. You know, he'd say,
I never
love
got
you,
the whole
and-
story of Dr. Chufo, but he did grab hold of me because he was involved. He had his finger in a lot of bowls of soup, you know.
Yeah,
and like
very involved.
He was
different
helping
things.
with Fonfino Giordano with the Battaglia group, and he had a couple of other little things going. But he grabbed the hold of my arm at one time and said, "You know, Father, you may think of me as like a pious Jesus kind of person, but there was a time I wasn't so close to Jesus." He says, in fact, he said, for about 10 years I carried a pistol with me to work, because he explained all of that. There was difficulties with the union, and he was threatened by certain shady characters that he might find himself dead someplace if he didn't cooperate with them. So there was quite a story of Tony Chufo. But in midlife, he really came to the Lord in a new way. He was running a business, a provisions business in Queens, and there's difficulties there. I don't know detail at all, nor is it important now, but he said, finally I was able to put that gun away.
Well, we're back to spiritual warfare now.
Yeah, we're to
because
spiritual warfare. We go, that's right. And we go
and
with-
that's the real spiritual
that's real
warfare.
spiritual
I just
warfare.
wanted to underscore some things that Rob was saying, that the battleground is really in our mind, right, Rob? That's really it. That's where the battleground.
Definitely one of the fronts. But as far as weapons go, I think Father Peter's totally right. Like Padre Pio said, bring me my weapon. I don't leave home without a set of
The
rosaries.
rosary, right.
The rosary.
And we're so blessed to have that. It's amazing when you think about that. We have the rosary as our weapon, and of course the Word of God, which is the sword of truth. And Paul talks about that all the time. But I also wanted to say something that kind of to highlight what Rob was saying about people have. It's amazing, have such a lack of understanding the Lord's love for them. And in the hundreds and hundreds of people I've counseled, I could say every one of us has to struggle to really get that. And sometimes we totally understand God's generic love of the world, but to know His personal love for us, what He delights in about us, what are the things about our personality that He particularly loves, how He kind of gets His own personality in there. The Lord has a personality. I mean, the characteristics of God are mentioned in all the names of God. In fact, around our whole dining room table, we have actually, it's quite interesting, embossed the names of Jesus in Scripture, and all those names give us another clue to His personality. So His personality reacting with our personality produces a very personal relationship. And I think that once you get that sense that this is a personal God who loves us, and He loves the things about us that maybe the person next to us doesn't have, and He loves something about them that we don't have, I think that's like the kiss that Rob got on the couch.
Yeah,
That's
I
what you
just-
say. That's
yeah.
the shifting
Absolutely.
moment,
Absolutely.
right?
It was absolutely a shifting moment for me, and that's immediately was washed over me, that I knew that God loved me, and I knew His mercy, and I just wasn't familiar with that. I mean, I love the regimentation, I love the structure. It was great, clean living in the military for me. It was a wonderful experience. I'm not knocking that, but my personal experience was that they didn't teach me to surrender spiritually, so I did everything in the physical. And I thought when I failed, like I said, that I wasn't trying hard enough. So I would get back up. And it wasn't until I was completely exhausted to where, I really feel like the Lord stormed the hill of my heart. And that's how everything came about.
Wow, He stormed the hill in your heart.
There you go.
I love it. I
Yes,
love
yes.
that. Oh, Lord, storm the hills in our heart. Come and storm those hills.
There's a lot of nice tie-ins, and I've been reading this book. We were privileged in recent times to have Neil Lozano and the Deliverance Group, the Catholic Deliverance Group in Philadelphia, instruct some of our own people here in the diocese. Father Charles Mangano and Father Tony Stanganelli are involved in Catholic Deliverance Ministry according to the guidelines of Neil Lozano. But bringing together the Father's personal love, this is Abba's heart. It's about the love of the Father, and finding our way back to the Father's delight. It's an extended meditation about spiritual warfare in light of the prodigal son, in light of the image of the prodigal son, and I just would recommend this book because it brings together a lot of the different themes that we've been talking about today of spiritual warfare and knowing the Father's personal and intimate love.
And can I just say that is my most favorite scripture to teach on, because the thing I love about it is that the Father saw the Son when He was still far away, and really what that tells us is that the Father was looking for the Son. He didn't just happen to catch him out of the corner of his eye. It says he was up on the
Right.
roof, right?
We saw him at a distance.
At a distance.
Yeah.
And I love that he was up there looking, seeking him, and he hadn't just folded his arms and said, okay, well, that's his life, he's decided to do that. And you hear a lot about tough love these days, especially in the field of psychology. And if you're practicing tough love, you really need to know who you're practicing it on. It can be very, it can sometimes not be the right choice. And by that I mean that God enables us also. I'll probably get in a lot of trouble for saying this, but the Lord sometimes, many times, enables us. And there's times for hand-holding, and there's times for tough love. And we can never say things are black and white in psychology, and sometimes that's a dangerous thing when we hear these different buzzwords and we learn a little bit about something. We forget that the human being is so complex and so complicated. But the Father certainly wasn't practicing tough love that day.
No.
He jumped right off that roof, right?
That's right. That's right. And we don't know the story. The story continues. We don't know what happened between the prodigal son and the elder brother. Jesus leaves that hanging. That's still a drama to be told. We'll have to get to heaven to find out if those two ever reconciled. Because that brother wasn't going into that party. And then,
Right.
the Father is. We see the Father. The story ends with the Father's wonderful words. But he was dead and is now alive. He was lost and now is found. And the parable ends there. So we do hope the brother came in, but we don't know for sure. So it's the mystery of human decisions and so forth that we have to trust God for good results.
But when he ran down that road, too, I find that so exciting because, the kid was saying, oh, yeah, just let me, be a servant in your house. And that was a classic moment for a parent to say, oh, now I told you this would happen. You see what you've done? You're a disgrace. And go through all that and then say, okay, come in the house, but I'm not happy with you. But instead he said, no, don't talk. We're celebrating. It's crazy.
We restored his dignity.
We're celebrating.
Put a robe on him. Put a ring on him.
Which is kind of what happened to
Slaughtered
you.
the fattened calf.
Right? Isn't that kind of what happened?
Metaphorically, I
To
think
you?
so. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was. I just knew as things were happening and progressing. No, I mean, well, me and my wife had that discussion.
Well, of course.
We did
Of course
have
you
that
would.
discussion.
But as far as the extended family,
No, I made it a point though to apologize to everyone personally for my shortcomings, because I wanted to take ownership of what I had done and what I had failed to do. You know?
Amazing.
So I can't be thankful enough for the Mass and the priesthood and the genius of Catholic faith. And when you're talking about the prodigal son, you brought me right back to that wonderful book that Scott Hahn wrote entirely on that parable. It's
right.
beautiful.
That's right.
And he breaks it down. I mean, I'm a simple man. I'm not a learned man like Father Peter. I mean, that's how I need it, So, and he breaks it down so I can understand it, and that was a wonderful book.
Yeah.
I was also reminded of the story when Jesus says in Matthew, it's about the sheep, and
90, he leaves the 99.
Yeah, if a man has 100 sheep and one of them has gone astray, does he not leave the 99, the hills, and go in search of the one that went astray? So I thought of that as the Lord reaching out to you and bringing you home, even though so it's that you're special, that he went out just for the one. Because if you think about it, that's pretty crazy, because you have 99. Why are you going to go after one? But he did. So I think that highlights how special we are as well, that he would. And it's almost like you can't believe it, but it's what God is telling us. So
and also it seems to me that people who, like Rob, who have a lot of stuff going on like that, are kind of like being attacked ahead of time, because you have a mantle on you and an anointing on you for the Lord. He's going to use you, and he is using you all the time, but that he has a special call on your life. And so I really believe that people like that, kids like that, are most vulnerable to attack.
Sure.
Before it's realized, before their destiny is realized.
I didn't think of it like that.
Yeah, the world's a very distracting place. I sometimes compare myself to a dog chasing cars. You got all these cell phones, everybody's on the internet, with all the bells and whistles of the world. I remember being in confession, sharing that with the priest shortly after I come back. I said, Father, I'm distracted. I felt so focused on just the glory of God and salvation when I was in the desert. And he said, of course, there's no distractions.
Right.
It's life or
Right.
death. You're in a
Right.
war zone. It's very simple. People don't think of war zones like that, but that was my experience.
Down to the basics, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
I was telling Father Peter that, and it's a good FYI for everyone to know, just kind of segueing off what Rob's saying, that in my practice last week, I came upon the knowledge that every psych ward on Long Island, every bed is filled. And people there are young kids waiting in ERs, actually, to be admitted. And they're all young people from 15 to 28 in these psych wards. And what really is occurring to us as clinicians is that we are being parented, our children are being parented by social media, and and by the peer group, and parents are losing any kind of leverage. Really, 24/7. We've never had that kind of stress. This is a stress that my generation certainly didn't have. If I was bullied in school, I could come home and be safe there, but I didn't have to look at 27 videos popping up every 3 minutes about other kids where everything was going great and it's good, and just saying this and saying that. So these kids never escape.
say, of the Abba's heart. I mean, the whole idea of Neil Lozano was spiritual warfare in the right sense, but on the other hand, he brings us back to a meditation on the love of God, because that's what will sustain us, through our spiritual journey, experiencing really and feeling the love of God, personally for us.
Amen. And you'll never go thirsty with God's love. And we just want to say that, thank you again for listening, and keep listening to the show to be fed, and Living Waters as well, Catholic Counseling Center. And just thank you so much again, Rob, for coming.
Oh, absolutely, Rob. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Father. I appreciate everything you've done for me.
And God bless you.
And Deacon Dave as well.
Thank you.
And especially you, Barbara, and thanks for having me here, Catalina.
No problem.
Viva Cristo Rey.
Amen.
Amen.
Bye. God bless.